In this video, I'm just going to describe the way I get my drawings from thumbnail sketch to refined drawing to transferred onto the surface of my eventual artboard. This is a process that needs to be respected. You can't rush it. You have to be able to protect the surface that you're working on, the artboard itself. If you start drawing on that, that will eventually mar the surface. It'll have pencil erasings, hand grease from your hands, all sorts of different ways that that surface can get marred. And once you start working on it, you'll see that it'll start to resist in different ways, making it uneven across the surface and unpredictable. You don't want that. So this process of taking your drawings from thumbnail to rough drawing to refined drawing to transferred working drawing is, like I say, something I recommend for all your traditional media purposes.
This is a semi-finished illustration on illustration board, done with mixed media. But of course that started off as a rough sketch. In fact, you can see here some ideas in development. There's no great concept here. It's just a little sketch of myself doing what I like to do, almost as much as drawing. In fact, I like to do it more than drawing. In fact, the thing is, I have, if you can see them numbered here, this was my very first idea. It's not much of an idea. In fact, it's not much of a drawing. I just imagined something where someone looked like they were singing and playing the ukulele at the same time. This was number 2. I refined that idea a little bit more, and something about it just seemed a little bit stiff. I don't know, maybe it was the character. It looked a little bit too, well, it didn't look like me. I think I carry my weight a little bit differently. This seemed a little bit more, where was I? The next one, number 3. Oh, I started working on the face here. Again, it wasn't really, it looked too young. I think was the problem I had there. And so you can see I actually just sort of developed the face. The face sort of dictated here. I think this one here is when I started to realize I wanted something that was a little bit more characterized. I developed that idea a little bit further, and I think this is where I ended up. So I can't remember what the development really was. Maybe it was this guy here. But once I had that face and that sort of characterization, I think I simplified that just a little bit more. This was, I think, what I ended up with. And as you can see, I took this very sketch and scanned that. And in Photoshop, adjusted some things, cleaned it up a little bit, and printed that out just a little bit larger. Again, I'm working at a relatively small size. We don't need to work very large. So from here, I'm going to get my tracing paper. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's large enough to cover my drawing. You guessed it, I'm going to take my drawing here. Now, there's nothing wrong with this drawing, actually. This is a lovely drawing. What I'm looking to do here is just clean up any of the small details that I haven't quite resolved yet. In fact, this could be the final drawing, but I am going to refine this once more. I'm going to position that underneath. I prefer to work with color erase pencils for my animation days. And I'm going to refine this drawing. I'm just going to make sure that I've considered all the details that I actually want to include. The depth of the glasses is definitely something I want to include. In this way, I'm going to have a linear drawing. Okay, so I now have a working drawing. Now this working drawing, as light as it is just what I need. Now what I'm going to do is transfer this drawing to the work surface. Now the artboard that I'm working with, the Canson mixed media artboards, and you can see I've got something in here already. These are some of the exercises I do in class. There's a previous exercise. Here is the completion of that sketch. These are the sort of things that I do in class with my students when we're talking about rendering form and working with mixed media. This being sort of a stylized realism as I describe it, but it's sort of the same idea of what's going on here. This is the surface onto which I'm going to transfer that drawing. This is a mixed media surface. It's a rough surface. It's also very thick, if you can see, on end like that. This board is what we used to call illustration board. You can see the maker there. It will take liquid media. It'll take dry media. It's very flexible. And that's one of the reasons why I always choose to work with something like this. Now I need to transfer this to my work surface. And I'm going to do that by flipping that drawing over and using a bit of warm colored chalk. This is just drawing chalk. It's something someone might use for life drawing, for example, but I prefer to use something that has a warm color to it. This is just a terracotta, but I sometimes will use something that has a much more strong orange or even red tint to it. And I'm just going to work that across the surface of the back of that drawing. And I don't have to have too much on there. And as you can see, the surface is not so soft that it's going to accept a lot of this extra powder. But I want to work that powder into the surface like that. Put this away because I now have that chalk dust all over my hands. If you in a very clean space, well then you could probably collect the dust this way and dump it, I suppose, strategically. Do it the old-fashioned way. I'm just going to blow it out the window. Okay, I've gotten rid of the excess dust. Again, I'm just going to work whatever is there back into the surface, because what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be transferring that drawing back onto the surface. You can see why I've gotten rid of all that excess dust, and I'm going to position that, but I want the edge of this with some tape. All right, take that. The reason we're doing this transferring, rather than just working onto that surface, for example, drawing and erasing and then redrawing and refining all on that surface, is as we do all that, we are marring the surface. And the more we leave behind residue, pencil residue, hand residue, drawings out, all that sort of stuff, makes this surface less and less likely to work effectively. You're going to get dead spots, for example, very quickly. What we're trying to do is preserve that working surface as much as possible as we transfer this drawing down onto that surface, so that what we're left with is a nice pristine version of this drawing and the surface ready to be worked with. So I'm going to do that now. Sharpened by pencil, and I'm going to transfer this drawing down to the surface. Okay. You can see here I've worked a little bit on the lines of the face, and you can see how that drawing has now been transferred. Now, this is where you can start to see why I chose orange. This is going to be part of my underpainting. That drawing is going to exist underneath all the other work that I do. If that drawing shows through at some points, well, that's okay. For my style, I have no problem with that, but I do want that color to be complementary to the color scheme that I have going on down there. It's easier for me to make that color look more exciting if that outline is warm colored. Here, again, orange or almost terracotta, but anything warm. We see this in the paintings of the group of 7 painters, specifically Tom Thompson, how he used a bright orange-red underpainting that showed through his other colors, giving his cools and blues more punch by having such complementary warms right next to them. This, I find, works the same way. And you can see what I've done here. As I draw this face, I'm paying attention to the contours, the outlines of the major shapes, the nose and the face outline. However, I've also put in some lines such as these. These are the terminal lines. It's the transition point between the light side of the object and the shadow side of the object. But I like to think of it as what's called the core shadow. The core shadow is the darkest part in 3D form, but in an image like this, for example, you can see how the core shadow has been treated almost as a strong terminal line. I haven't done that extensively, but I am going to do that in various parts here. For example, for the finger, this line and this knuckle here is going to be where the shadow falls, but the top parts of these fingers will get the light. So I'm sort of giving myself that indication by putting these terminal lines. Okay, I'm just going to find the terminal lines of a couple of different places here. I want to think about the light and shadow. There's another spot. You can see I've got a nice light line here that gives me some definition. Something to think about. I don't mind if that shows up. That's the thing. For my style, I actually have no problem if those construction lines remain. I think that's part of the charm, actually. Again, we are thinking about craft as well as technique. I should have probably have drawn in some of these lines earlier, but again, I'm thinking about the principles of radiating folds. Tension point, which is underneath the arms here for someone who carries his weight so top heavily, they're going to radiate out like that. So I'm just thinking about these, but this wrinkle here is coming from, again, a tension point, the buttons, and so there's some radiating out in that direction. So I have here a vignette. It's not the completed tableau that this is. The advantage of working this way is I still have a working drawing here. If this doesn't work out for whatever reason, I haven't lost my drawing. I can transfer this to another surface. That's really important. And I now have, as you can see, transferred my drawing onto my surface, ready for me to begin.